Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks very much for attending this special broadcast of the elections 2019. And we are doing this in partnership with the Center for Development Enterprises. And we're going to focus on urban migration in South Africa. It is one topic that's not discussed as much as it should, given that a substantial portion of our population lives in the cities. And in their own right, they pose a particular challenge or a range of challenges. And the Center for Development Enterprise has done a lot of research in that regard. Anne Bernstein, the Executive Director of the CDE, will tell us a bit more about that. And the way we're going to run it is we are going to put questions to the representatives of the EFF. Modise Network is here with us, and welcome, Modise.
Thank you very much.
And Hope Papo is here representing the African National Congress, and welcome, Hope. And Solim Simanga, the mayor of Tshwane, is also here representing the Democratic Alliance. We have other party representatives from the IFP, Mkuleko Hlengwa, who is with us. We'll be talking to him. The ACDP, represented by Wayne Treng, who's here, and welcome, Wayne, as well as Good, the new kids on the block. And Linda Lotz will be posing a question as well and taking questions and comments from members of the audience who are here. You are all welcome. Thank you very much for coming to be with us for this special broadcast. And thank you very much for putting it all together and, of course, making us focused on the topic this morning. So give us the broad overview of why urban migration, cities are so important in the South African context, particularly given that the elections are just around the corner and we have to focus on the cities.
Well, thanks, Tim. So South Africa talks a lot about growth and about jobs and how we need both of these, but we never think about or talk very much about where that's going to happen. And if South Africa is going to get the growth we desperately need and the millions and millions of jobs we need, most of that is going to be in the cities. South Africa's future is urban. We're a country that's already nearly 70% urbanized, and in the next 10 years we're going to move very close to 80%. So the future of our cities and how we manage the cities is very important. Now, CDE's done a lot of work on how we can start making the cities places where poorer people who've been born in the city or people who are moving to the city can get a lot more opportunities. Because at the moment, they're far from opportunities. They live far away from where the jobs are, where the education opportunities are generally, or the better ones. And we've got to change our cities from apartheid kinds of cities where housing stretches for miles and miles away from opportunity to places where they're cities of hope, where people can get a place to live close to where things are happening in the city. So we're very interested in growth, and we're saying the cities are a very important priority if we're going to get the inclusive growth and the jobs that we need for everybody. So, Tim, that's why we wanted to focus people's attention on how do we do better in our cities? How do we include more people and make these cities that are growing much faster and expanding opportunities to all those people who've had so little for so long?
Thanks very much, and there we are. I mean, that's the reality of South Africa. Almost 70% of the country's population living in the cities. And is it correct that Gauteng is now home to what, 25% of the country's population?
Yeah, so Gauteng is now nearly 25% of the population. So this big urban region is the heart of the economy and the future of the country, which doesn't mean you ignore everybody else. We should have a rural development strategy. We've never had one. Done terrible things to rural people, but we've never had a constructive rural development strategy. We need one. But the truth is, most countries all over the world, coming to the city, being in the city, you have higher income, you have a higher chance of getting out of poverty, and you have much higher productive economic growth in general.
And that's a global trend anyway. So, Mr. Holpapo, let me start with you. I mean, the key question here is that of the economic opportunities as well as economic growth. Creative ways that the ANC has in its manifesto or thinking or promises that you are making to the people that you think would assist the country in driving this growth that we're discussing, as well as creating the opportunities for people who increasingly are migrating into the cities.
Thanks, Brother Tim. The strategy of the African National Congress on urban development hinges on a few elements. Firstly, the acceptance that urbanization it's a reality. We moved from 50% in '94 to 66+%. The area we need to look at its skills revolution linked to the fourth industrial revolution, but also manufacturing. Developing townships to be economic centers, including revival of industrial parks in townships and building more industrial parks in townships, because the reality that people live in townships, informal settlements, is there at the moment. So we have to actually create economic activity where people also live, whilst at the same time bringing them closer to economic opportunities. The area of land is very important, because land hunger is very, very serious in urban centers. We're already working with at least the EFF to amend the constitution to deal with the issue of land, because in rural areas the crisis is not land, but it's more about the problem of hunger. In urban areas, land hunger is a problem. Hence the decision which was taken in 2017 is part of our manifesto. Basic services, because they are under pressure, but we also have to understand that if you don't deal with urban poverty, problems of urbanization will not end, because people move to urban areas on the basis of neglect in the rural areas. So there has to be a balance in terms of urban development, also looking at rural development, so that there is some form of a balance, without saying people should not come to urban areas. We also deal with migration of people from other countries, and our view on that one is that illegal migration should be dealt with firmly, without actually offending.
Let me just quickly ask you a question. Illegal migration should be dealt with firmly. The question would be, why is it not being dealt with firmly anyway? Why is it something still to be done?
I think there are responsibilities for government and for citizens themselves. When citizens rent their buildings to foreign people who have entered South Africa illegally, without checking whether they are legal or not, there's a problem. So there's government responsibility to strengthen border control, but at the same time, you don't strengthen border control on the basis that you want to prevent people from coming into the country. You do it so that there is a managed entry into the country, but there's migration internally and externally. So South African citizens also have responsibility. It includes even employing a person without knowing whether they are in South Africa legally or illegally. So our view is that it must be a joint responsibility between the state and citizens of South Africa, because some citizens do it because they want to exploit people, foreign nationals. So I'm raising it immediately because one of the critical issues around services in urban areas, it's migration internally and externally. And we have to, I put it on the agenda so that it's not a hoha we don't. So when somebody says migration should be managed, it's not xenophobia. So it's one of the critical issues we are addressing. I mean, the strengthening of border control through the agency is one of the strategies we actually need to do. The role of the defense force in border management. Sure. All those things are very, very critical, but without neglecting rural areas.
Yeah, let's pause for a while. Let me ask Modise Network. You have a little bit of experience, if I may call it that, of the EFF in managing the cities, or at least holding your partners to account in managing cities. So you must have learned a few things and made certain observations. Where do you think the opportunities lie to drive economic growth and create opportunities for many people who are excluded and live from far away from the opportunities?
So let me just start with the Hope next to me, who's shirking responsibility in terms of the issue of immigrants, foreign nationals, and our fellow brothers and sisters who come from our neighboring countries. It's very irresponsible for him to say that citizens have a duty to regulate that. They have no responsibility, they have no control over it. The reality is that the Department of Labor itself has no control over whether employers hire South Africans, which is the first priority, and whether they hire foreign nationals only on the basis that they bring very rare and necessary scarce skills. And also, when cases are being reported, the Department of Labor and CCMA have basically proven that they're basically in a state of collapse. They're unable to assist with anything. We know it because we get a lot of labor cases coming to the EFF out of desperation. Let's come back to the issue of economic growth and development. You can't discuss local economic development without discussing the land issue. You can't use neoliberal theories and frameworks to define what is an urban economic development framework, because South Africa is still sitting with the problem of unresolved land disparities for African citizens. Let's start there. So what do you need to do? Yes, you need to develop, you need a well-developed urban local economic development plan, but it's coming from a skewed property relations perspective. It's coming from a skewed ownership perspective. It's coming from a skewed income inequality perspective. It's coming from a racialized income inequality point of view. So you need to deal with the fact that in South Africa, you're not going to run away from the fact that we must expropriate land without compensation. Now, Gauteng is only just over 1% of the total land mass. So your crisis in Gauteng now, even if you had a proper, Section 25 clause in the Constitution that allowed you to expropriate without compensation, you could only expropriate so much in Gauteng nonetheless, considering you won't be able to touch certain private properties of people's private homes. So what is the option? What is the alternative? The first alternative to proper urban development in South Africa are based on two things. One, it must be state-led. It can't be led by the private sector. The state needs to have a decisive say, control, and stake in local economic development, whether it is urban or it is rural. That's the first thing. The second thing is that you need a decentralized economy. You can't have an economy that is dependent on one province. Gauteng is contributing 35%, just in excess of 35% to the overall GDP of South Africa. That is unsustainable, even if we had all the gold and the oil and platinum, which we don't have, but I'm mentioning it hypothetically. It is unsustainable for the entire country to rely on Gauteng. One, for spatial reasons, there's physically no space, and also two, for reasons of other forms of
Can I just come in just on one point?
Yes.
And then I'll be moving to Solomon Simanga in a moment. You say state-led economy, right? And in South Africa, the moment you say state-led, you make a lot of people flee to the mountains.
Yes.
Whether they be investors or ordinary citizens. They say, which state-owned entities come to your mind, given that they are asking for bailouts now, that many have seemingly failed, not seemingly, and others seemingly are collapsing at this time. So, in other words, the state does not have capacity to lead any economy.
That's not true. It's absolutely not true. You can't take an example of one or two incompetent, incorrigible, and corrupt individuals who have an unfair control thanks to the governing party that fails to hold their own people accountable. You can't take an abnormal, example and make it universal. But let me come back to state-led. In South Africa, there's been the song and dance from the neoliberal cabals, which are obviously backed up by the white-controlled media, and of course, the centers of white monopoly capital. And our dear friends here on my right, the DA, there's a narrative that's going around that increased economic growth will give you jobs. It's a fact that in South Africa, increased economic growth brought a loss of jobs. You would remember from '96 when the ANC decided to privatize state entities such as the former ISCO, parts of ESCOM, parts of the Airports Company of South Africa, I could go on. We lost in excess of 1 million jobs.
Okay.
And we never regained those jobs. Let me just finish, Tim. Just one very quick point. Let me go quickly to the issue of local economic development. There's been a fashionable trend, which I don't know why the ANC encouraged it, but they did, of shopping malls owned by the big banks, Nedbank, Old Mutual, ABSA, all these banks, building shopping malls in the township. What have those shopping malls resulted in? They've resulted in job losses. They've resulted in killing small businesses in the townships, Soweto being in case in point, and all the other major townships. They've also resulted in casualization of labor, thanks again to the ANC's reckless moves in '96 to amend the Labor Relations Act.
Can we pause right there, because the points you are raising in their own right require a response, I suppose, from the ANC as well as questions from members of the audience. Solim Simanga, you've been running the city of Tshwane for a while now, over the past couple of years. You have seen for yourself what's going on. What do you think works, and which areas do you think require improvement?
Well, Tim, let me start off with the issue that the two colleagues have engaged on, and that's the issue of land and rights of ownership. Hernando is also an economist, put it succinctly in a theory called the dead capital, where he says you can informally occupy property but not legally own it. It's dead capital. If you want to talk about growing the economy, you need to be the owner of a particular property or land in your own right, because then that helps you to either use that to raise capital, or to use that, to have some sense of ownership which can be passed from generation to generation. I'll give you a typical example, Bratin. If we were to go the route that the EFF is proposing of land, Soweto, there's a part of Soweto that is an exact example of how not to do it. There's a part in Soweto where there was an expropriation that took place without compensation, or people were paid almost nothing. And they were removed. They were told, no, you now need to move from this piece of land. Because I don't have a title to that piece of land, government can then dictate when and how I'm going to be moved, which is not good, even for business. Who would you think will come and build a 1 billion rand property and attract investment and employ people if they don't have security of tenure, or if they know that once they want to then sell that property, they will not be able to sell it? Now let's go back into the engine, which is the economic growth, which are the cities. The cities are the centers in which jobs and businesses are supposed to thrive. But what we failed to do in the last 2-3 decades, and actually even going back into the apartheid days, is that the spatial planning has always failed the majority of our people. How the people have been left, you know where you come from, Komabopani. You had to travel, or your parents had to travel. The parents who are coming from Hammanskraal have to travel 3-4 hours to get to a place of work, 3-4 hours at sometimes to go back. How do we ensure that where we do the reconfiguration of the spatial planning, we are able to bring people closer to jobs, or able to then ensure that where we are planning now to have settlements, there is viable economic activities that are happening. You go to Pennyville. Pennyville is just down the road from here. They were told that you are building slums here. You are definitely building slums, because you are building just boxes where people go and sleep, but there's no other economic activities. Whereas you can't even build a small thing like a shop close by where people are able to then ensure that there is some kind of exchange of money and economic activity that is taking place there. What we now need to be moving towards is to say, where does government itself invest? Because if you're talking about an engine for it to run well, it needs to be a well-oiled machine. How do you oil it? Where we as government, are investing, where we are building infrastructure ourselves, roads, electricity infrastructure, water infrastructure, sewer infrastructure. Because then after doing that, you are able then to say, if I'm able to do this, then I can go into the private sector and say, I'm able to give you an uninterrupted flow of electricity. I'm able to ensure that with the policemen and women, metropolis and however, we're able to protect your assets that are here.
But here's the point, Mayor. Again, apologies for the interruption, because you are in charge, right, of the city of Tshwane.
Yes.
Now, a resident in Hammanskraal asks blocks themselves, you've got Babelehi there, the factories are lying empty, they're not operating.
Right.
In Harankua, the factories used to work, they don't work.
Right.
And then there's no useful transport. I think the railway line to the services were suspended at some point. And it boggles the mind even at this time that it's what, 30, 40 kilometers away from the CBD, yet there's no meaningful public transport that goes to that place. You know, people are left to figure things out on their own. They wonder why a factory they could walk to, you know, in the case of Babelehi, it's closed. Now they must go to the city of Tshwane itself, I mean the Pretoria CBD. Then there's no transport going there. That's actually a very
Thank you very much for bringing that point, Bratim. And the history and the records are there to show. And I wish Premier Makura was here, or at least the as well Premier from the Northwest, that Mahuma Pelu was here. I actually got into a meeting with all of them, my officials, the Premier's officials from both Gauteng and the Northwest. Because I said, here we are ready to commit 660 million to ensure that we revitalize Babelehi, we revitalize the Estualek industry, we revitalize parts of the Watlu, Silverton industrial area, the Harankua area. The answer we're getting is that these properties, okay, two of the properties, the Harankua industrial area, which incorporates a part of the Roslyn area, and the one in Babelehi is still in the hands of the Northwest. And the Northwest wanted money out of the Northwest government, wanted 140 million for it to transfer what is government-owned property into another sphere of government so that we can invest. Imagine if I had invested that 660 million rand into that property. The Auditor General comes and says, but you invested in a property that is not yours, that is not in your books, that is an illegal activity. We understand exactly the point that you're making to say we need to bring economic viability closer to where people are, and we were putting our money where our mouth is.
I understand that. So as matters stand, and I'm pleased that this is coming out, so the opportunities to create employment in those places are being held up because of bureaucracy or governmental wrangling. Is that what you're saying?
It is, and I think it goes to the greed that was there. Now, you would remember in the Northwest government, there's something called the Northwest Corporation. Now, all the viable properties are held in a corporation, so they're almost held in what I would call a state-owned entity, which hasn't worked, has failed. Now, we are sitting here, I can tell you now, John Dory had come to the city to say, if we are ready, and we got this property, we are willing to invest in there. There's quite a number of companies, plastic doors, quite a number of companies that are big, that were willing to create hundreds of jobs. We will say, if you are going to fix this property, we will move into this property. We'll hire people from around here, we'll upskill them, and we'll get the economy going.
And of course, people can hear for themselves. By the way, you can also engage on social media. We have those hashtags there, hashtag cities, or hashtag urban-led growth, or hashtag elections 2019, if you want to comment on what is being said here. Let me go to the political parties and start with the ACDP's Wayne Tring for just a brief response to the question that we are discussing now. What is your take of what is being said here?
Thank you, Tim.
Please stand. Yeah.
Thank you, Tim, and good morning to all of the panelists. Wayne Tring from the African Christian Democratic Party. I think very clearly, when it comes to the land issue, the EFF, the policy that EFF has, is a policy that says all of the land must belong to the state, or if the EFF were in government, belong to the EFF, who would be the de facto government at the time. Black and white. So I think that all South Africans need to know that if they vote for EFF, there will be no security of tenure with regards to the EFF being in government. I think certainly the ANC also have failed, and I would agree with the EFF on this particular point, that it is government's responsibility to ensure that you have safe borders. It is not the citizens' the citizens' responsibility. It is government responsibility. Immigration and our different policing sectors that are there. I think when it comes to maybe what the DA have indicated, we want to agree that security of land tenure. As the ACDP, we agree that there has to be security of land tenure. It gives individuals collateral. It gives them some type of step up to move up the ladder from a place of possible poverty to a place where they have their freedom in the sun. I think what I found within some of the presentations, Anne, was while you said that you're not excluding rural development. There's nothing in the document that shows that there has to be an integrated approach. While urban development is important, we cannot and certainly should not exclude rural development. Our agricultural sectors need to be feeding the cities, which certainly needs to survive. And so I think that an integrated approach is one that is necessary.
Thank you very much. And then let's hear from the IFP, Nkula Konhlangwa.
No, thanks a lot, Tim, and to the panelists. Well, I just think three things arise out of what has been said. Firstly, the ANC has never been committed to border management to begin with, and that's why we've got a crisis on our hands, to the extent to which Prince Buthelezi was actually chucked out of cabinet in 2004 for piloting a bill which was going to secure our borders. It was unprecedented. The president of a country took his own minister to court. So that's why we've got this kind of obfuscation now from the ANC, sort of giving that to citizens as opposed to it being a core function of government. It's an indication yet again of a part which has got no direction for this country. Secondly, insofar as the land question is concerned, the EFF really needs to be honest with citizens. And what they're calling for under the guise of expropriation without compensation is essentially nationalization. And therefore we need to look at the ramifications and implications of nationalization, because if you look at countries such as Tanzania, for example, the security of citizens insofar as them being permanently in the areas of residence, business and otherwise is at risk and under threat, because the government can at any time come into that space and chuck people out. Finally, insofar as the urban-led growth agenda that we're speaking about today, the IFP has got a 4-point plan, which, amongst other things, includes the strengthening of our education capacities in all these areas so we can cultivate and build the necessary skills, knowledge, and expertise for business to function. Healthcare becomes one of them, to ensure that actually those who are working are in a state of health to be able to work, reduce the high levels of absenteeism which hinder productivity in our business space. Yeah. Infrastructure development remains the core of urban-led growth. You're looking at water infrastructure, you're looking at sanitation infrastructure, roads and railway, because without those connections in any economy, then you are bound to have a situation where the economy is not going to grow. And then finally, on that one is that land mapping along economic strengths of the country, so that you can be able to tap into where South African economy will be able to yield maximum results out of maximum use of the land. So for us to say then is that Section 25, as it currently stands, is well equipped to do that.
Thank you very much. And Linda, lots of good. Let's hear from your party.
Thank you very much. My name is Ntabiseng Lepoko, and my first response would be to Anne, and then when we talk about the release of the public land for the public good. And I feel that it's important that we not just focus only on the existing cities, but look into building new cities that are integrated, and also building, having the government institutes there, and as well as focusing on education, because I find that, and especially looking at Cape Town, because I've spent like past 8 years and being in Cape Town, that people spend about 40% commuting from where they stay to the places of work, instead of being productive and spending time with families. And also, I'd like to comment on a gentleman from the DA. I'd like to find out which cities have you governed, and for how long, which cities you've governed successfully, and for how long, under whose governance, and also when it comes to issues of having underqualified, people being given senior positions, and they're not delivering, and also there's issues when it comes to those kind of appointments, and also the tender awards that are being regulated here.
Thank you very much. Okay, what I'm going to do now is to give the panelists each a minute to respond to what has been raised, and then we'll go for a short break and then open the discussion up to members of the audience. Now, I hope there's a lot for the ANC to respond to, but try and summarize it in a minute.
I think the issue around the strengthening of border control I mentioned, it's actually part of the plan. The issue I was talking about is that it's employment in our own private spaces. It's not the issue of management of borders. Domestic workers, issues of our own buildings being rented. That's the area I was talking about, not the issue of managing migration. Labor Department itself, there are programs to strengthen inspectorate of the Labor Department, because there has been actually problems in that area. The issue of infrastructure, that's why I was talking about urban development and rural development. Infrastructure is important. I talked about skills revolution, national health insurance, and it's not a short-term plan, it's a 14-year plan dealing with health infrastructure, because health is critical. Basic services, because services have actually collapsed in city of Johannesburg and Tshwane as we speak. You can see, I mean, just go around and you'll see that basic services have collapsed. It does not need any rocket science to see that.
Let me interrupt you there, because we still have got more time to ventilate some of the issues. Modise Network.
Thanks, Tim. Let's hone in on the myth which racist portions of our society likes to, use to to misguide and to sort of fear-mongering tactics for them to hold on to the privilege that they unduly have. There's no such a thing as that the state, a state or government that cannot manage property. You asked the question earlier about a few government entities that have failed to run their businesses profitably. That is a fact. It's a fact of life. Many businesses in the private sector are not running themselves profitably. But all the state land that is in state control, even under the very corrupt ANC government, it's standing, it is intact, there's operations happening there. The issue is governance. Secondly, Singapore, if the DA are so smart and they think they know everything about correct capitalist economic policies, they need to go to countries that they themselves love. They need to go to Singapore and go to the Singapore government and ask them, how did Singapore develop such a vibrant, dynamic, modern property sector? 60% of the land and properties, commercial properties, as beautiful as buildings like the one we're in now, are owned by the state in Singapore. The state in Singapore, at a time when Singapore was going through an economic depression, decided to correctly take land, responsibly so, and also take the property sector, not just the land, and develop it. So as we discuss further, I want to give you more examples of countries, including even in the UK, that have successful land ownership and custodianship by the state.
I'm sure a lot of people have got their own views here, and as I said, we're going to give you a chance to add to the discussion and debate. Solim Simanga.
But Tim, let me latch on to the last conversation and say, look at a country like Venezuela. If you want to get a good example, where inflation now is standing at 10 million, number one. Number two, look just across the border here. Just across the border. Let me tell you what Singapore did, because we have done our research on that as well. We're going to Singapore, the one that is being used as an example. Singapore then went and said, what reserves do we have? If you have reserves, then you're able to build the force that you now need to ensure that what you want to introduce will be supported. You don't just say expropriate when you don't have the reserves or the skills to then take care of what you're going to expropriate immediately after. Go to Zimbabwe, a clear example of that. But I hope the only thing that collapsed is the taps that used to pump corrupt money into the pockets of those that has been stealing. That's the only thing that has collapsed. The city has not collapsed. Modise has now given us another upgrade. By the way, the city has been able to deliver service without even borrowing a cent last year. Look at what has happened in the last 6 years under the ANC, in the last 6 years of ANC government. They were borrowing on average R1 billion a year. Last year we were able to do without getting a cent from anybody, and Modise still gave us an upgrade. We are now standing at 2 notches up above every other municipality here in South Africa, the metro municipality. That's number one. Number two, services are not collapsing. We are dealing with a backlog that was left by lack of care that was coming from there. Services or things that were not maintained, that were not prepared on time, that we are now creating an environment and creating a space in which we are now replenishing some of the infrastructure that has been left to decay. Royval is an example of that. Zikechat water treatment is an example of that. The wastewater treatment in Hammanskraal is an example of that. If you go to an area like Garsfontein, if you go to an area like Valhalla, where the pipes asbestos pipe that should have been replaced 15 years ago are still standing. And we are saying we're correcting that, we're fixing that. In Garankuwa, they gave tenders to friends who went and laid wrong specs in terms of the piping that is there. We are correcting that problem. So that is the only thing that is collapsed there.
Okay, all right. Well, they've made their cases and we'll be opening it up. We will be opening this discussion up for a while, but we're going for a short break. When we return, it's your turn, and you post the questions and you tell us whether you believe them or not. And we will be back in a short while. Of the debate on urban migration and how the parties propose to create opportunities and help the cities to grow economically, as well as transform the cities, given the history of most of the metros of South Africa. Now, we heard earlier on their ideas, the EFF saying that the state should play a leading role in the economic growth. And we also heard from the ANC talking about improved border controls, and the DA saying that let people have security of tenure and put money into building local businesses. And they've said a whole number of things. But I wonder if they impressed you as members of the audience, that going into the elections in 2019, you believe that they can create these opportunities and that they can help the economy grow. If you have a question or a comment, please raise your hand and let's hear from you. Let me start with Mr. Shongwe at the back there, and the gentleman next to you, and the 1, 2, 3. I'm asking you to be very brief, right? So after that corner, I'll come to the lady here, and I'll prefer another lady. So I'm going to take 5 comments. 5 comments very briefly, and I'll come to you as well, ma'am. So it's 1, 2, 3, and then 4 and 5. Let's go. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Peggy Spear. I would like to direct questions to all 3 political parties sitting in front. ANC, EFF, and DA. you have been either in government or in coalition. You have been involved, your governments, at municipal level and national level, those who are at national level, in corruption, and that has been the case. And now, what lessons have you learned in the 5 years, which you are saying in future you are going to help fix so that we are corruption-free and we focus on employment? Don't give us gibberish as you have been giving us gibberish in the past.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. Just a point, in the administrations in the city of Cape Town, Johannesburg and Tshwane, there's clear alignment that you need to regenerate your CBDs, you need to attract investment there. It's being done in Cape Town where they're trying to attract social housing, in Johannesburg where they're trying to revitalize the inner city, and in Tshwane as well. The irony is that the ANC continues to build RDP houses in the far outskirts of our cities and undermines this entire model. So I'm trying to understand why this continues to happen, and perhaps the ANC gentleman can respond.
Okay.
One final point, if I may. I'm surprised that the EFF doesn't own their economic policy in this space. The economic policy of the EFF on land is that the state owns your land. They'll expropriate land without compensation, but your house, your business, all of your private property will be owned by the state. Own that, explain it, justify it, give us some examples that exist which demonstrate that this generates growth. There aren't examples, but I'm eager to hear them.
Thank you for the opportunity. The first question will go to DA now that they're in the driving seat on the two cities. What is your commitment to the public transport and the transformation and empowerment, and your attitude towards the taxi industry and the role and its role in the mainstream public transport? And clearly there's a definite link between congestion, economic growth, and quality of life in our cities. But the pace at which the municipalities are implementing integrated public transport systems is very slow for desire. And the cities are not making strides in this direction. And your views in relation to changing the apartheid spatial form in terms of our cities.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And let's hear from the lady here. Let me remind you to identify yourselves, by the way.
Good morning, my name is Jessie. I would like to address my question to Mr. Salim Smango. The DA, I agree that we should have security of tenure and private property. However, the DA still has to win the trust of most South Africans, that there are hundreds of thousands of South Africans that don't trust that actually you will be in favor of us, of what our growth is, whether that's because of unwise tweets made in the past by the head of your party or things that have happened that for most South Africans, we don't actually believe that what you're doing is going to benefit the average below wage South African. So I would like to ask the DA how you are planning on winning our trust so that we can actually see the evidence of your economic plan.
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, Tando Mtumkulu from the South African Cities Network. My question to the panelists is there's been very little said about the informal economy in our cities, which is a big driver of what we want to get, which is urban-led growth. So I'd want to hear from all of you, how do you recognize it and how do we propel it in our cities?
Thanks very much. Okay, let's pause right here. I've identified 5 issues. One is corruption, the second is housing and public transport, economic benefits to the working class, if one may call them that, the working people, and not the top business people, as well as the informal sector. How do you incorporate it in the models that you are proposing? Where do we start? Solim Simanga?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Peggy, you asked a question about, and I think it will also latch on to Jesse's question. Job speaks for itself. Let me give you some facts. 85% of DA-run governments have either got clean or unqualified audits with no findings. Fact. 60% of the jobs created in South Africa created where the DA is governing. 60% of the jobs that are created. So how do people trust us? We're not going to go there and say we are a liberation movement, you can trust us. We're going to go there and say to them, these are the things that we have been able to achieve. This is where we have implemented clear policies and you can see the change that is there. The gentleman there was asking a question, and it was a question directed to the ANC about them talking about integration, but continuously building houses outside of the urban setup where the people are supposed to be. So we are actually now carrying on with the legacy of apartheid instead of breaking that backbone and then bringing people back. So we are saying, where we started governing, where we've been governing, we have been able to rechannel, the policies, or to direct the policies in how we're delivering as well. And that's what we're going to be selling to the people, and that's how people are beginning to trust in what we're saying and in what we're doing.
Modise?
Tim, I'm not sure why people want us to continuously repeat ourselves. With the expropriation of land without compensation amendment of Section 2025, the land will be in full custodianship of the state. However, private property, or rather property, anything on top of the land, will remain in the full ownership of whichever individual entity, trust, or whatever. And we can't continuously come to platforms like these that are...
Well, unfortunately, it's election time.
No. Tim, you don't interrupt other people, and you don't even allow me to finish a sentence. Please don't do that. So we cannot continuously keep repeating the same thing.
Yeah.
The IFP gentleman who's from Parliament here, they agreed to support the motion in Parliament, but they come here and disown it. I'm not sure what that is supposed to mean. People must learn to separate issues. There's a process in place. There's a constitutional review committee underway that is dealing with issues of modalities and all the intricacies of what happens after the amendment of the Constitution. So we need to focus and not conflate issues. But let's come to the issue of the spatial development that is happening outside of urban areas, where in fact that is happening distant from economic centers. That is an inheritance of the past spatial planning strategies of the apartheid government, which unfortunately the ANC in 25 years refused to change. And that can only be changed when land is in full custodianship of the state, so that the state is able to equitably redress all needs that will also address issues of transportation. But the thing that I wanted to raise about the taxi industry is that under an EFF government, because there's no EFF government, and the people who are suggesting or insinuating that there's a coalition, EFF is not in coalition with anyone. Might I use this opportunity to reiterate, we are not in coalition with anyone. We simply voted, we used our voting block to vote for a party that we believed would at least not be corrupt. They will remain racist, they will remain protecting the interests of racists and white people, and they will remain disdaining the majority of this population. However, we believed that at least on the corruption side, not that they are not corrupt, but on the corruption side, they would be easier to control than the ones who are now out of hand.
Okay.
On the taxi industry, I want to raise a very critical issue.
Yes.
The complexities of what is happening now with the taxi industry is that the regulation aspect needs to kick in. So we are open to negotiate. For instance, we'll be meeting soon with the Orange Farm Taxi Association, who have invited us. But we are happy to negotiate that under an EFF government in Gauteng, we will ask the taxi industry to at least concede to regulation as a first step, so that we can then move towards integrating the taxi industry, because the taxi industry is something that is non-negotiable in the value chain of public transport. It can add a lot more value.
Can I get your comment on the informal sector very briefly before I move to the...
We raised it earlier, but we didn't have enough time to expand on it. When we tried to raise the issue about the increase, or rather the skewed development of shopping malls, which are owned by the big banks and that have kicked out small businesses. The world over, go to the most developed economies, the world over, small industries must exist alongside large established corporatized industries. Because if that does not happen, you take a spaza shop far from Maponya Mall or other major economically established centers. What you're doing to that small person is that you are robbing them from gaining from the rands and cents that the consumers are spending in the large entity. So we have a clearly worked out plan, which will obviously be unveiling on Saturday at the manifesto, about how small industry should benefit from large entities, because you can't do away with the large entities.
And Tate Papo?
We still have to debate the Auditor General's report of Tswane.
Yeah.
And the and the major tender which is irregular, which was irregularly awarded in Tshwane,
which will include the pay one,
including bad appointments of people in offices who are not qualified.
Which will include the pay
There's
one.
also a report which our caucus in Johannesburg has lodged with the public protector about the problems and mess in Johannesburg itself. I think, Mr. Sibiya, our view is that public servants and political leaders who are involved in corruption must answer for themselves. The era of collective responsibility is no more. They must actually answer for themselves. That's why you see at all the commissions, people who are named, we are not saying they are guilty, they must actually go and explain, answer for themselves, because if your name is put in any commission, doesn't mean that that information is correct, whether it's a PIC, whether it's on, judged on the commission. So I think that's the approach. The renewal include that public servants, because there's sometimes a confusion of political leaders and public servants who are involved in all sorts of shenanigans, including in DA-run municipalities, and because you can't come here and behave as if public servants you are actually managing are not corrupt, including in political offices. The issue of informal sector includes working with the informal sector to build regulations, because informal sector cannot mean everything happens, but they are an important sector in the economy. They contribute a lot. Sometimes they are not even calculated. So part of the urban development must include working with the informal sector to improve bylaws so that they can give an input themselves as an informal sector into which are the best bylaws which we need to actually do. The issue of public transport, intensifying bus rapid systems in all the cities, which we had started before 2016, they have to be actually improved, and integration with rail. That's why the Metro Rail program is back on track, including production in Ekurhuleni of rail stock. The last issue which you raised is that the DA, you raised the issue of trust. We acknowledge when there are problems. We don't say there are no problems. Hence, we are able to actually put implement the public protectors reports, and some of the commissions were not called for. Our leadership actually put them to ensure that we check where it is. We would have simply said we'll do it after elections. We do it before elections because we think we need to sort out problems of South Africa with citizens and all political parties. We didn't say no.
Thanks very much. And I'm going to take another round of questions and just a brief comment from you, Tatem Kabela, the lady there at the back, and yourself, ma'am, and the lady next to you from Good. There's another one there, and then the gentleman from EFF. Let's start with you, sir. Tatem Kabela.
I have no mic.
It will come.
I'm Ishmael Mkarela. I will stand as a rep of Johannesburg Inner City Partnership. I would like to assume that the politicians understand the situation as it is. That ordinary people are trying as well to exchange whatever they have been given. An RDP house, whether you say it's theirs or not, they'll be trying to sell it. And sometimes they undersell. The question which I would like to ask from you, ladies and gentlemen, is the situation as it is, the borders, we already have many people who are settled in the cities of South Africa. They're already there. Do you have a program of integrating them? Because I don't think we'll have to expel them. They are there. And no country has succeeded in protecting borders.
Okay.
We have just rounding up. We have properties like buildings and land which is already in government possession. How do we make it as contributors to urban growth, development, employment?
Thank you.
You name it.
Let's go to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. My name is Hanifa Gutu. I'm from the International Republican Institute. I think first of all, I would just like to raise my concerns with the comments that were made by ANC that people from outside of South Africa, in other words, foreigners, are the ones that are probably limiting the opportunities for economic development. And I think I would be mostly interested in hearing about what the parties here are doing in terms of, I don't know if you've heard of something called land value capture, whereby even with the way the situation is, whereby we have people that have been located very far from where the opportunities are, what can we do to take the opportunities to where they are? So the way land value capture works is maybe you can improve the modern mass transit systems. You introduce maybe like a rail system, and then by so doing, you generate interest in that particular area from the private sector. They then take the businesses there, and that sort of increases the value. So I'm more interested in hearing about those kind of plans, rather than just, because for me, it sounds more like you're trying to, shift the blame onto somebody else.
Can you give to the lady next to you?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Matsati from Gauteng Good. Firstly, I like what Mama Pat said the last time we had a policy conference, that we can no longer sustain corrupt officials. It can no longer be business as usual, where we have leaders who are sitting right in front of us who are being accused of 12 billion rand going missing, yet we are here seated and we are discussing such issues. In order for us to improve our urban, and when we're speaking of urban economics, it is important that we firstly speak on the issue of corruption. What measures are we taking against these officials? We can no longer have as Mr. stated, that we have to have commissions and we need to discuss. People need to be arrested. We need effective, let me not say radical, but we need to have practical means to address officials that are corrupt. Okay. What are they doing with that? Thank you.
Right, we'll pause here so that I can give you an opportunity to wrap up and start with you. Hope Papo?
I was not, I must just say clearly, I'm just saying entering any country without indicating to that country that you are in that country is not correct. That's the only thing I'm saying. As to what people, we're not talking about people stopping opportunities. I mean, it's a normal thing. You enter the country, you declare yourself that I'm here. That's what I was saying about. The issue of taking out every people from, I mean, it's not what I'm talking about. You cannot do it. You have to integrate people. They must add to the skills, and our policy is very clear. I don't think it's xenophobic for anybody to say somebody who enters any country, they must declare themselves. It's not xenophobia. But as to when people are already in South Africa, how do we work with people from other countries? Not only out in the continent, in the rest of the world, in economic development, because there are people who are professionals, there are people who actually have got capacity, but they are not doing what they were doing in their own countries. So I was just saying, it's the issue of coming in.
Okay, Modise, I have to stop you right there, and let's hear from you.
Yes, let me start with the easiest one. Once you come down hard on corruption and you have non-negotiable sentences, so in 2014, the EFF proposed in its commitment through the manifesto that we will have a minimum 20-year jail term imposed for corruption, state corruption, for those found guilty of corruption, and we will sustain that position. So that is easy. Once you become hard and consistent on corruption, it will, as time goes, eventually resolve itself. Commissions.
Are you optimistic that practically as one of the...
It's practical, but of course we know that there's a lot of problems in the criminal justice system, so of course we're just getting to the objective of it, right, to the end result that we want. But you know that the police, the NPA, the judiciary itself, across levels, magistrates, regional courts, right up to Supreme Court of Appeals, there's a lot of problems that need to be resolved. You can't get into that. I wanted to hone in on the issue of the old buildings. There's a person who raised an issue of old dilapidated buildings, which is a serious phenomenon, especially in Johannesburg. The EFF had proposed even in 2016, and we continue with that proposal, and we're actually pleased that Mashaba is trying to advance it, right? Because that was the basis for which we agreed to vote with them, that they advance our constituency issues. Old buildings in all major cities are not often monitored. In fact, buildings that are in a state of disuse are not monitored, and that is low-hanging fruit for anyone in government. It's low-hanging fruit because the owners have already deserted the buildings, so it makes it cheaper for the state to have a property that can be renovated and then either put back into residential stock or used for other sort of business purposes.
Let's pause right there. And Mayor Msimanga?
Thank you very much, Bratim. I think, calling for a commission, and we've seen this in South Africa, it becomes a trend. It's not accountability, it's just shifting it back and hoping that the people forget. Tell me one commission that was instituted that led to people going to jail. It's never happened. This commission right now, it's going to expose things, but we are only going to know the finalization of it after elections. Why couldn't we get it before elections? Ceci, I'll give you the Auditor General's report and the management letter, and you would tell me in that, where does it say that the mayor is implicated? But I can tell you of a number of tapes that were coming from somewhere where it was not good. But we'll leave it at that. There's a systematic problem, Bratim, that we have to address as a collective, whether the EFF, whether the DA, whether the ANC. Giving somebody who is unemployed a house, but after that, the person still sits there without any kind of a meal, it's a problem. We have to accept that. Right? So somebody would say, well, I'm sitting here, I don't even have my next meal, but here's something that I can sell. What then becomes the viable option? I'm going to sell it, go back living into a shack, and then at least I'm having something to eat for a while. It's something that we have to rethink in terms of how do we ensure that once we take people up to a certain level where I'm saying giving you a house, what then other services can be there to be incorporated into
I'm going to ask you again to pause, and then Anne, if you can wrap up for us very briefly, please, and then we will move to the next session.
Well, I think that it's good to hear people focusing on specific issues. I wish we had more time, and maybe we'll have separate debates on housing policy or transport policy, all of which is really important. But what I think is being underemphasized is how we get more jobs and how we get growth. And it's not easy. It's not like, oh, well, let's just declare the townships, we need more jobs in the townships. It's really hard to move from the country is at less than 1% growth per annum, and we need to get to 4, 5, 6% if we've got a chance of giving people employment. So I think city people and parties have to think much harder about the specifics of growth in their own cities, in the big cities particularly, and smaller places. And there you have to talk to your firms, your local business community. What prevents you from starting another factory? And learn and listen what the problems are so that you can start to fix them. And some of that might be that city has to shout louder to the national government about policies and laws that are holding them back. But unless we start really focusing on growth and employment, we're not going to make the kind of progress the country desperately, desperately needs. I'll stop there.
And Bernstein, thank you very much of the Center for Development Enterprise, and Solim Simanga of the DA, thank you very much. Modise Network of the Economic Freedom Fighters, and Hope Papo of the African National Congress. Thanks again for having been the panelists during this segment of the broadcast, and to members of the audience, thank you. Now, we continue with our streaming online Q&A session. This was for the broadcast part that, as I mentioned at the very beginning. So we can continue with the questions. I said I'll take a few questions from members of the audience. I've got a few that I would like. Let's take there at the back, and they use a cap, and then we'll do it that way. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. I'd just like to state that it is disappointing that we get fixated about the political aspects when we're supposed to be talking about economic growth. We should be talking about, we would like the political parties to pronounce themselves on the modernization strategies to urbanize the townships instead of township economic development, such that they contribute significantly to the GVA of the cities. We'd like also to find out what strategies they have to foster emerging soft economic sectors, tertiary economic sectors, that will create high-value jobs and capture the emerging young qualified people. We also want to find out from you what strategies you're going to have to liberalize the financial institutions or access to the finance
I'm afraid,
situation.
But, yeah, thanks. We've got several questions from you, but I'd like to spread the opportunity around. As part of development and growth, let's hear from you.
Thank you, Ndati Tim. My name is Brian Palom from South African Informal Traders Forum. It's very unfortunate that in South Africa, we base our hopes to these political parties. I can assure you, EFF, Democratic Alliance, they are, whether they are in coalition or they are agreed or they vote together in the cities, they simply show us that what African National Congress did in the past years to fail the poorest of the poor, they are continuing that legacy. I'll do a typical example. The lady here asked a typical question, what are you saying about informal trading? There's no answer. I think they confuse a small business and informal trading. We approached the ANC on a provincial level. We gave them a program. They are nowhere where they are prepared to work with the community. I think South African communities, they need to stand up and realize that there's no political party that will deliver them from whatever that they are sitting at now. We have to fight for ourselves as informal traders. We had to take this government, we took ANC-led government in Johannesburg to court so that we can sustain informal trading. That's why there's informal trading in the city of Joburg today. It's because of the court ruling, not because of a will of a political party. Now we are going to, on the 11th, we'll be going to court to force the led government by the Democratic Alliance. They are refusing to compensate those people that were chased out there. So we had to go and argue that with court. So what I'm saying to Tim, I'm not going to pose any question. To me, they are the same thing. The society in South Africa, they need to stand up for themselves. As much as ANC is claiming that they liberated South Africa, but the reality, communities in South Africa, they stood up for themselves. They never had a hope in any person until up to 94.
Thank you. And are you asking a question? Okay, at the back then.
Thank you. My name is Dikiledi Siloa. I'm the spokesperson for DA Youth and a councillor in Tshwane. I'll start off with the ANC. The ANC is talking about illegal immigrants, and it's great to see them actually promoting the DA's campaign of protecting our borders. However, what I'd like to reiterate to you is that you failed in protecting the borders. You're asking what should the South African Defence Force be doing? You should have had that answer and implemented it ages ago. And as well, you've also failed to integrate illegal immigrants and immigrants into our communities, because at the end of the day, it's where the townships are mostly affected by it. You also talk about infrastructure development. How many years have you been in power to the point where today you look at infrastructure development? What you did is you continued with the racial apartheid spatial planning. And in keeping that, you did not build in outside of the cities, you kept within the cities, creating the overcrowdedness and not creating other economic hubs. You look at the likes of Northwest Province and Limpopo and the potential that is sitting there to growing more economic hubs in South Africa, and you failed to do that because you're not building on the infrastructure. Tim, can I just finish a few more points that I also want to come in? Is as well to the Mayor of Tshwane. You look at how informal traders, where there was actually public participation on informal trading in the city and advertising, and the bursary, if you could highlight on the bursary that you were giving to the learners and children of informal traders in the city of Tshwane. You, as well, you need to also look at how the youth is available to get on city buses to go and look for employment within the city of Tshwane.
Okay, and all right, I'm stopping you right away. Okay. That's a speech now. And we have the mayor here who's had ample time. But let me give you an opportunity first again, Hope Papo.
I think it's very interesting that the DA spokesperson of youth doesn't talk about supporters of the DA who stopped the city of Johannesburg from actually building houses in and around the city and other nodes of development. The decision by our conference, by the way, our decision is not an overall decision that you expropriate land without a plan. It says without disrupting food production, agriculture, and the economy. So it's not an unconditional expropriation. It also talks about people owning. It's not a model of the state owning the complete land. There are communities who must own land. There are cooperatives which must own land. There are individuals who must actually own land. State must own land. So it's a mixed model based on even giving people turn. So there are actually supporters of your party who have been refusing, not in my backyard syndrome, preventing the city from actually. So you say we continued. No, we didn't continue. In Gauteng, simply there was land we couldn't actually use because people were saying this is private land, they want to use it for speculative purposes. So part of expropriation is to ensure that absentee landlords, people who are using land for speculative purposes are not allowed, if that land is supposed to be used for agriculture, for economic development, for basic services, and for food production. So I think it's disingenuous for the DA to come and speak about continuation of racial spatial development when our government has been in and out of court dealing with people who actually wanted the continuation of apartheid spatial planning. It's important that you tell your supporters to support us because we are talking about expropriation for purposes of agricultural development, economic development, and increasing of food production.
Now, 2 points which I would like still, whilst you're still on the floor, to respond to briefly. There's a gentleman who said, as far as he's concerned in the informal trading space, they've lost confidence in all political parties because of the history they've had. If you can make remarks in that regard.
In the city of Johannesburg, there has been cooperation. I think the cooperation with informal trader collapsed at some point. I mean, the amendments to the bylaws, the informal trading sector participated in them. But there were problems in that relationship with the informal traders. At the end of the last term, there was an initiative to try and actually sit around the table to work with the informal traders to correct areas where there were mistakes and collapse.
Sure. All right. Then Modise Network of the EFF, I'd like you to pick up on the question regarding the tertiary sector as well as the informal traders, because, frankly, we haven't said much about fourth industrial revolution, for instance, that, in modern times, one would have thought that that would be one of the major thrusts. It looks like we're focused more on the property side or primary type businesses, manufacturing and so forth, than fourth industrial revolution, as we were asked earlier on. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I would have to resist the temptation to go through our manifesto because it's only coming up this coming weekend. But I don't understand why there's a general sense of negativity around, some of the efforts that we've made, for instance, as the EFF in Gauteng, to assist the informal traders, because we have done quite a lot considering we are not actually in government. However, we want to assure the informal trading sector, pretty much as we do with the taxi industry, that once the EFF is in government, the informal trading sector will be radically transformed. Firstly, to start off with, there are compulsory goods that government can procure from informal traders. If informal traders are also sourcing their products from local manufacturers, right, as a precondition, for instance, as far as is possible, because the reality is that we need to reduce the reliance on imported goods. Whether they are cheap and they are accessible to us is one issue to be set aside. But the reality is that working with informal traders, it's possible for clinics, hospitals, even schools to procure some goods from informal traders in a way that will force the informal traders as well to work in a less fragmented way. So we do have a clear strategy and a plan. It's a pity the gentleman has not met with us as yet. Maybe he has met with other EFF members. We have branches that also meet with stakeholders. Therefore, we cannot, I cannot comment too much on whether he's had an experience with EFF members that has not been very satisfactory, but he's welcome to speak to myself and the provincial team. Let's come to ICT, for instance. One of the things we proposed was that the steel sector is one sector in Gauteng that needs to be re-nationalized, because the steel sector still is one commodity that cuts across all economic sectors. In terms of ICT, for instance, by now, the state should have invested in ICT products as a participant, an active participant and a shareholder in, for instance, a manufacturing business, pretty much like the South Koreans have done with Samsung, LG, and other products that actually were created from investment by the state. So the EFF is going to put forward proposals such as those, specifically focusing on the ICT sector, to answer your question directly.
Okay. So let me see.
Thank you very much. So, Ausler, you asked about what we're doing in terms of the economic upliftment. And one of the things is visit our Tutuka centers, where we are saying let's take the activities and the economy close to the people and make it easy for people to walk in. Instead of getting into a taxi going to the CBD, they can walk into a center, meet a sales official there, meet the DTI official there, meet people from the bank in there, get to know what tenders are available, get to know what job opportunities are available. Those is what we're now doing. But over and above that, we are saying that we don't need to rely all the time on big business. But we can partner with big business so that we are able to then bring small businesses, including informal traders, so that we create a value chain, that there is some kind of a link between what big business is doing, what government is doing, what small business is doing, and what general communities are doing. What we mean by that, you build models around the townships in which you live in. And those models become business models that, create a value chain that can be used even outside of, the townships in which the products might be produced. Let me give you an example. There's an industrial area in Orlando West, one of the oldest industrial areas. There's an infrastructure that is existing there, and the people that are producing there, they say they cannot even sell the products. They are making furniture, beautiful furniture, but government has never even once procured from them. But we're busy importing. They're making this white electricity cables, white pipes. Show me an RDP house anywhere in South Africa that has ever used any of those products. So it needs to start with us and say, what kind of value chain are we creating so that we are able to then create the jobs that are needed? And it takes government some time to be able to then intervene and say, it starts with us where we're going to be procuring so that we are able to then assist these businesses. And that's when we talk about true upliftment of the economy. Let me the informal traders.
Yes.
We're the first one to meet with all the informal traders in Tshwane. We then took it from there and say, all the 7 regions of Tshwane, they must group themselves and have an informal committee or informal trader committee. And then we are sitting in the mayor's office with what we call a mayoral committee around that. I've said to them, you raise a cent, I will match it up to R1 million so that we are able to take your kids to university or to Technicon or to whatever of their choice. We are now building an informal a storage facility in the west of Pretoria. We're building another one in the center of Pretoria, where we are saying to informal traders, you don't have to now sleep, because some of them are sleeping in the city center because they have to guard their goods. We are now saying we are building that facility so that they might be able to put their facilities in a safe place and be able to then commute home. We've also now gone as far as to say, let us also ensure that your trading spaces are also now promoted. What we're doing now in Maravastad, if you go to Durban, as an example, Bratin, there's a station there in Durban. It's an informal station where it's an informal trader space, where if I know I want pots, big pots, I'm going to get them there. Spices, I'm going to get them there. Blankets, I'm going to get them there. Traditional clothing, I'm going to get them there. What we are doing is the same thing there. And we are saying we will ensure that council is also promoting on a monthly basis activities that are able to attract people who nonetheless be able to go into that.
Let me interrupt you there for a moment and hear from you, Mr. Tlengwa. The IFP, you've heard some of the concerns that people have raised here, and from where I'm sitting listening to the comments, it sounds like we need to simplify things, but I don't hear how we're going to make it even much easier for people to take up business? Because somehow many people who have tried it will tell you one of the biggest challenges in South Africa is just to run a business itself is a complex matter.
No, that is true, but Tim, thanks for the opportunity. Let me just clarify, Mandis, on one thing, because we may leave here with a misconception of what happened. In the first instance, we supported the motion to go out and look at the possibilities of the constitutional amendment. That was the first motion in the House. That we supported. What came back, we didn't. So it's glad I'm here so I can clarify. It was a two-pronged approach. In the first instance, we supported it, and then you came back with something which we couldn't actually support. It's just a matter of process. So, yeah, just I should clarify that particular aspect, lest we run the risk of coming out here with a misconception. Insofar as informal traders are concerned, one of the most basic things is the over-regulation of informal trading in this country. If you go to Durban, for example, police officers are coming with trucks and bakkies and literally chasing people off the road and saying, don't work here. Now, you're not chasing criminals, you're chasing people trying to make an innocent living. So those are the basic things. So basically what we are saying as the IFP is that allow people to flourish where they are. Don't over-regulate. Instead, go after the people who are corrupt, who are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And on that issue of corruption, let me just make this point, because the ANC may also leave this room taking kudos for the commissions of inquiry. The State Capture Commission of Inquiry is not an outcome of an ANC process. It's the public protector. Had they had an option, that never happened. So you're actually complying because you have to, not because it's born out or birthed out of the ANC. As far as the ANC is concerned, none of these things should be investigated. And what at the heart of that is then to say individuals must account individually, whereas their actions had a direct and material impact on the functioning of government, because those bribes, all those things from whiskey to bribe packs of chicken that they received, it was all designed to manipulate the state system. So the ANC has got a duty actually to hold those people accountable and hold itself accountable, because it is at their behest that the country began to collapse.
All right, and thanks very much, Mr. Mkhuleko Hlengwa. And I'm told we have to end it right here, because I'm also directed on how I should run things. Right? You may be looking at me, but I've also directed on how we have to run the proceedings. And of course, there are many issues that I would have liked to touch with you, but we'll have to end it right here. Some of the issues we're still going to debate and discuss going forward. We did not, we have Anne first. Okay, let's have Anne wrap this part of the discussion. For me, we should have discussed going forward. We were going to raise things on housing, safety of people in the urban areas, and so it goes, healthcare and so forth. But Anne, this is your turn.
So I think one of the big issues that we need to discuss in the country and about the cities is, what is the role of the state? How can it be an enabling state? Some people would like it to do more, but in my view, it's how can it be an enabling state to make sure we get the right environment so citizens can flourish, whether they want to have a firm, start a firm, or get to a job, or get better education and training. Now, one of the problems we sit with in South Africa, it's a challenge, is a lot of the powers that many cities in other countries have, our cities don't have. So, for instance, if you want better education and training and you want better schooling, that's a national function, essentially. So I think those issues have to be debated if we're going to make our cities engines of inclusion, poverty alleviation, and growth. And that requires jobs and much better skills. And so, for me, the big challenges are, we're now a society that is nearly 70%, almost 10 years' time, 80% urbanized. This has big consequences for how we allocate resources, for how we think about powers, at which level of government. Can our big cities have more powers because they're closer to people than a faraway national government. That's a debate we need to have. We need to also talk about our state-owned companies, which, irrespective of the problems they have now, they own land and they do things that affect the cities, from the port in Durban to the land they own in Johannesburg or Tshwane or elsewhere. But the cities don't have a say in how that is allocated. So the relationship, the powers of the cities to influence what really matters for the citizens, the growing number of citizens in their areas, is a much bigger issue that South Africans need to think about. So the fact that we're now so urbanized has a lot of consequences that this society hasn't really started to think through. And we need to do that in a much more strategic and systematic way. And I think voters need to ask political parties about those kinds of issues rather than the slogans or the sort of some of the smaller issues that are obviously important, but it's the big thrust of these issues that are going to affect whether this country can deliver for all its citizens, and we need competitive cities to do that.
Thanks very much, and let me take the opportunity to thank you, members of the audience who came here, and I know many individuals in this room are very active in improving the different sectors of city life, and we appreciate your efforts in that regard. Members of the political parties who came here, thank you as well, and the representatives of the parties, the panelists, thank you for making the time to be with us. We're planning to have further series of these debates going forward. But once again, thanks for your participation. Thank you.